Hello everyone, and welcome to Flow Fundamentals from the Automating Admin, the video series designed to help Salesforce professionals learn flows. In today's video, we will discuss the steps to take after our flow is built. We will go over saving, testing, and activating our flow, as well as how versioning works. By the end of this video, we'll learn how to save our flow, how to test our flow using the run and debug options, how to activate our flow, what is versioning. Like anything in Salesforce that needs to be configured or customized, we need to save our flow to commit it to the org. We can save as soon as we begin building our flow, as well as at any point something changes with the flow configuration. To save, click the Save button in the top right of the page. If this is the first time we are saving our flow, we are asked to provide a label and API name for the flow. Provide a descriptive but concise name. Personally, when possible, I like to start with the triggering object's name and then the action, but your org may have different naming conventions. Below the label is the description field. This is a long text area that allows for line breaks. Use this field to provide a description of the flow's purpose. I highly recommend always filling this out, even if the flow's name is self-explanatory. We will also come back to the description when we talk about versioning later in the flow. There is also a button labeled Show Advanced. Clicking this brings up additional flow configuration options. The options will vary depending on the type of flow. Let's take a look at a few of the options using a ScreenFlow as an example. When available, the How to Run the Flow option determines how much access the running user will have when running the flow. The default option, labeled User or System Context, determines what records, objects, and fields can be accessed based on who triggered the flow. System Context with sharing still enforces record access rules such as sharing settings, but ignores object, field, and permission settings. System Context without sharing allows the running user to access everything. This option is important if the flow interacts with records or fields a user would normally not be able to access. If the setting is unchanged, the user may encounter an issue when trying to create or update a record or field if their normal permissions prevent access. The Type option displays the flow type, and if the flow has not yet been saved, can be changed. The Template checkbox allows us to use this flow as a template for future flow creation. Finally, the API version can be updated to newer or older API versions. In normal circumstances, it is a good idea to move to newer versions when updating your flows, as newer API versions will have extra functionality. After the flow is saved, we can begin testing the flow. To do this, we will leverage the Run and Debug buttons at the top of the page. The Run button will trigger the flow to run as is without configuring any inputs or record data for the flow. Because of this, the Run button is not an optimal solution for testing, though can be used if the flow does not require any extra data, such as needing a record ID. The Debug option is much more comprehensive for testing. After clicking Debug, we are presented with options. These options will be different depending on the flow type. Let's take a look at ScreenFlow and Record-Triggered Flow debugging. For ScreenFlows, we are asked to toggle various debug options. Some of these may be pre-selected for us. The Run Flow as another user option is a great way to test if end users have the necessary permissions. After checking the box, select the user for the test. We are also asked to enter any input variables. This list is derived from all variable resources where Available for Input was checked. After selecting the debug options and entering in the variable values, click Run to start the debug. The main portion of the screen will display the ScreenFlow, which we can interact with the same way an end user would once the flow is live. On the right-hand side are debug details, which display each step of the flow's process and the actions taken. In this example, we can see that the record ID variable I provided was used to successfully get the related account record. The debug detail will update with each step of the ScreenFlow taken, such as clicking the Next button. Record-triggered flow debugging behaves a little differently. First, we are asked what path to run. If we have scheduled paths or asynchronous paths, we can select them as the path to test. By default, the Run Immediately path will be selected. Next, we select whether to run the flow as if the record is created or updated. This option may not be present if the flow is set to only run on just create or just update. This selection will also drive configuration options lower in the debug settings. Select the necessary debug options. Skip start condition requirements will skip any entry criteria set up and go straight into the flow's actions. Run flow as another user allows us to change the running user. Run flow in rollback mode allows the flow to run during the debug, but will undo any creation or updates made as part of the flow process. This is a great option to prevent changing data when testing. Now we select the test record. At least one record of the necessary object must be present in the org in order to test. If we select Run as created earlier in the flow, then we cannot change any of the current field values. If we select Updated, then we are presented with the records fields and can change them as needed. If you do not see the necessary field, ensure it is on the page layout for the object and record type before trying to debug. Once all the configurations are set, click Run. The main portion of the screen will show the path the flow took to complete the test, and on the right-hand side, it will display all steps and actions performed, similar to the ScreenFlow debug. After we have tested the flow to our liking, it is now time to activate the flow. To do this, click the Activate button in the top right of the page. The flow will now be active in the org. Once a flow is active, its steps and details cannot be modified. This is where versioning comes in. Versioning is making a copy of the flow in order to make any necessary changes. Only one version of a flow can be active at a time. When working with a brand new flow, the version will be version 1. This can be modified as needed until we activate it. Once activated, we will need to make a new version to make any changes. Click the Save as a New Version to achieve this. This will create version 2 in an inactive status, which will allow us to make any necessary changes. After version 2 looks good and is sufficiently tested, click Activate to deactivate version 1 and activate version 2. Both versions 1 and 2 will be locked from editing, and a new version will be needed if more changes are required. Remember that description field when saving the flow? We can also leverage this when creating new versions. While not required, I recommend adding a date stamp and an explanation of the changes. Normally, I add this below the general description with a line break in between. With this approach, we can see when and why a flow was changed at a glance. Speaking of seeing all flow versions, there are two ways to achieve this. In the flow editor at the top of the page, there is a drop-down next to the flow's name. Clicking this drop-down will display all versions of the flow, as well as which version is active. Alternatively, while in Setup on the Flows page, we can click the drop-down on the far right of a flow and select View Details and Versions. This will also bring up all versions of the flow as well as the descriptions. That's all for today's Flow Fundamentals video. If you enjoyed this topic, please be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see y'all later.